Welcome to Dead Quiet Mysteries, the place where every cold case, chilling crime, and unsolved mystery is brought back to life. From vanished persons to twisted betrayals, we dig deep into the unknown to uncover the truth that others left buried. Before we begin, drop a comment and tell us which city and country you're watching from. We love seeing how far the mystery travels. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and ring the bell icon so you never miss a case. Because here, some truths are only heard in the dead quiet. Hercule Poirot and the Poisoned Will. Chapter 1. The Gathering at Greystone. It was a crisp Friday afternoon in late October when Hercule Poirot stepped down from the small motor car that had conveyed him through winding Cotswold lanes and deposited him at the front gate of Greystone Grange. The house stood solemnly atop a gentle rise, its honey-coloured stone gleaming gold beneath the low sun. The Grange, with its tall chimneys, mullioned windows and ivy-clad facade, had the sort of grave dignity that only old English country homes seemed to possess. Autumn leaves crunched beneath his patent leather shoes as he made his way up the gravel path. Everything smelled faintly of damp earth, wood smoke, and distant roses. Poirot surveyed the house with narrowed eyes. "A house of secrets," he murmured, adjusting the knot of his cravat. "Yes, one can feel it. The windows do not merely look out, they watch." At the heavy oak door, a liveried butler opened with mechanical grace. "Monsieur Poirot, welcome to Greystone. Dr. Larch is awaiting you in the drawing room." "Merci, my friend," said Poirot with a slight bow. He handed over his travelling case, straightened his cuffs, and entered. The drawing room was comfortably appointed in the manner of the old gentry. Dark wood panelling, velvet upholstery in wine and forest green, and a faint scent of beeswax and lavender. A fire crackled merrily in the hearth, casting dancing shadows on the Persian rug. Dr. Jonathan Larch, a stout, balding man in his early 60s, rose from a deep armchair with a broad grin. "My dear fellow, you made good time." Poirot returned the smile warmly. "You exaggerate, mon ami. The car journey was most fatiguing. These English roads, they do not consider the symmetry of the spine, but the reward, it is this charming retreat." Dr. Larch chuckled. "You've not met the company yet. You may revise your opinion." Poirot cocked an eyebrow. "Ah, I detect a note of warning." "Not warning," said Larch, pouring brandy into 2 glasses. "Call it friendly preparation. You see, Alaric Langford's parties are never ordinary." "Sir Alaric Langford?" Poirot mused. "Your host. I have heard of him. Industrial magnate, old family, an insufferable bore if you ask some, brilliant if you ask others. Depends how recently he's threatened to sue you." "Charming," Poirot said dryly. Larch handed him the brandy. "This weekend is something of a celebration," or so the invitation said. "But I suspect Alaric has some ulterior motive. He always does." At that moment, a light tread approached and a woman entered. She was tall, elegant, and strikingly beautiful, her platinum blonde hair swept up beneath a silk scarf, her lips blood-red against pale skin. Her dress was of navy satin, and diamonds glittered at her ears. "Ah," said Larch, "may I present Madame Langford, Isabel Langford?" Poirot inclined his head. "Enchanté, madame." Isabel gave him a cool, appraising glance and a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "The famous detective. How unexpected." Poirot allowed himself a faint smile. "Not unexpected at all, madame. Your husband invited me." "Of course," she said, walking to the window. "He has a fondness for collecting clever men. Perhaps he thinks you will keep the rest of us in check." "Perhaps he simply wished to delight in my company," Poirot said lightly. "It would not be the first time." Her lips twitched, as if stifling a laugh. "If you'll excuse me, gentlemen," she said, and left as swiftly as she had come. Poirot watched her go. She is très belle, but guarded, like a sphinx. "Isabel is a mystery to most of us," said Larch. "Married Alaric last year, caused quite the scandal, much younger, French, I believe, or perhaps Belgian, like you." Poirot's eyes twinkled. "I am Belgian, certainly, but I think Madame Langford is neither of my country nor yours." As they sipped their drinks, others arrived. First was Felix Langford, Alaric's only son, a man in his early 30s, with tousled, dark hair and an air of careless charm tinged with nervous energy. He shook hands with Poirot, murmuring, "Yes, yes, I've heard of you. Bit of a magician with murders, aren't you?" Poirot gave a slight bow. "Let us hope I am not needed in such a capacity this weekend." Felix laughed, but it sounded hollow. Next came Octavia Langford, Sir Alaric's elder sister, a woman of iron composure, dressed in tweed and pearls, her greying hair swept into a severe chignon. She glanced at Poirot with vague distaste. "You're the Belgian, then?" she said. "I do hope you're not here to write a book about all of us." "Rest assured, madame," Poirot said politely. "I leave such endeavours to Mr. Hastings." She sniffed and sat down, folding her arms as if fortifying herself against nonsense. Last to arrive was Harold Quayle, a thin, angular man with a hawk's nose and restless fingers. He greeted Larch coldly, and Poirot not at all, before pouring himself a generous whisky and taking a seat by the fire. "Old business partner of Alaric's," Larch whispered. "They had a falling out. Some say it was mutual embezzlement, others mere pride." Before more could be said, the doors opened again, and the man himself entered. Sir Alaric Langford was tall, broad-shouldered, and commanding even in silence. His face was weathered, his silver hair brushed back from a noble brow, and he walked with a heavy cane tipped with silver. The room seemed to hush as he entered. "Ah, Monsieur Poirot," he said, striding forward. "At last, the celebrated detective in my humble abode." "You honour me, Sir Alaric." He grinned wolfishly. "You'll find Greystone full of curiosities, monsieur. The house may be old, but it's never dull." His gaze swept the room. "All here, I see. Good. Then let us dine." Dinner was served in the long oak-panelled dining room, where candlelight danced off silver and crystal. The meal was lavish, consommé, duck à l'orange, and a towering pudding flambéed at table. But conversation remained strained. Underneath the civil pleasantries, Poirot noted the glances, the pauses, the unsaid things. At the height of the meal, Sir Alaric rose and raised his glass. "A toast," he said, voice booming. "To old friends, new alliances, and the masks we wear." There was a pause, awkward, curious. "To truth," he added, and drained his glass. The moment passed, and the conversation resumed. But Poirot had caught the tightening of Octavia's lips, the way Felix avoided his father's eyes, the tremor in Isabel's hand as she reached for her wine. After dinner, the guests drifted into the drawing-room, but Poirot lingered in the hall. Something in Sir Alaric's toast troubled him, an undercurrent of theatre, of warning. As he made his way to his guest bedroom, Poirot paused by a window. Beyond the pane, the garden stretched into moonlit shadows. Somewhere, a fox barked. "Yes," he murmured to himself, "this house, it watches. And it waits." With that, he turned in for the night. But his sleep was not restful, and his dreams were full of strange symbols, a woman with no face, a broken mirror, and the scent of bitter almonds. Chapter 2. An ominous toast. The morning after the unsettling dinner unfolded with an uneasy calm. Greystone Grange basked in muted sunlight, but within its walls the atmosphere was far from tranquil. Breakfast was served in the smaller parlour, a room bright with lace-curtained windows and decorated in pale yellows and dusty blues. The silver was polished to perfection, the eggs delicately poached, and the marmalade sharp with Seville bitterness. But the usual cheer of a country house breakfast was notably absent. Conversation was minimal, and the clink of cutlery echoed more loudly than it should have. Poirot, seated near the end of the table, stirred his coffee thoughtfully, his gaze shifting from one face to another. Felix Langford looked drawn, his eyes shadowed. He buttered toast with mechanical precision but barely ate. Octavia, by contrast, appeared composed, sipping tea and reading the Times with a tight mouth. Isabel was late. When she finally arrived, wrapped in a long silk robe, her hair swept loosely over one shoulder, she offered no explanation and gave a brittle smile to no one in particular. Sir Alaric was not present. "I believe Father breakfasted in his study," Felix said curtly when Poirot inquired. "He's fond of privacy before noon." Poirot nodded. "And yet he seemed quite theatrical last evening, n'est-ce pas?" Harold Quayle snorted. "That's Alaric for you. Never could resist a bit of stagecraft." Octavia lowered her paper. "If you ask me, he's planning something. That toast of his, the masks we wear, what nonsense." Poirot set his cup down. "I found it most intriguing, almost foreboding." "I'd call it self-indulgent," Octavia replied. "He always thinks he's one move ahead. Life is not a game of chess." "Ah," Poirot said mildly, "but for some, madam, it is nothing but—" Before more could be said, the butler entered silently. "Madame Langford," he addressed Isabel, "Sir Alaric requests your presence in the library." She blinked. "Now?" "He was most particular, madam." She nodded and stood. Poirot observed her carefully as she walked away. Graceful? Yes, but a tension in the shoulders, a hesitation at the threshold. Something had shifted. The moment she had gone, Felix rose suddenly. "Excuse me," he muttered, and left in the opposite direction. Poirot noticed his cup remained full. Poirot looked across at Larch, seated beside him, buttering a crumpet. "Tell me, mon ami, what do you know of Isabel Langford?" Larch wiped his fingers. "Very little. Alaric met her in the south of France, Nice, I believe. No family, no fortune, but exceedingly attractive. Married her 6 months later." "And since then?" "She's been reserved, pleasant, but one never feels one knows her. Felix doesn't speak of her much. Octavia loathes her, of course, thinks she's after the money." "And Quayle?" "Rather more interested in his whiskey than anyone's marriage, though I've heard him mutter that she's not to be trusted." Poirot tapped his chin. So many suspicions in so short a stay. "Well," Larch shrugged, "Greystone breeds them." Later that morning, Poirot took a stroll through the gardens. The air was crisp, scented with damp moss and turning leaves. He passed by trimmed hedges and gravel paths until he reached a small, wrought iron bench beneath a pergola, half lost beneath crimson ivy. There he found young Elsie Brent, the parlour-maid, seated with her notebook, frowning. She started upon seeing him. "Oh, Monsieur Poirot, sorry, sir, I didn't hear you." "You are writing?" "Oh, no, sir, only copying out the list of linens. Mrs. Humber insists on it done by hand. She don't trust the typewriter." Poirot smiled. "You are efficient. That is good. And how do you find Greystone?" Elsie hesitated. "It's a fine place, sir. Grand, but cold, if you take my meaning." Poirot nodded slowly. "And the family?" She coloured slightly. "I shouldn't say, only I don't think they all get on, if you see." "Indeed. Tell me, last night, did you remain in your room?" "Mostly, though I did go down to fetch extra firewood for Miss Langford's room. She always wants it warm." "At what time?" "After 10, I think. The fire was dying." "Did you see anyone?" "I passed the study." Sir Alaric's voice, he was speaking sharply to someone. "To whom?" She looked uncomfortable. "I couldn't say for certain, but it sounded like Mrs. Langford, though she didn't answer much, just quiet." Poirot inclined his head. "Merci, Mademoiselle Brent, you are most observant." By noon, the sky had begun to cloud. Poirot returned indoors and found Harold Quayle sitting in the morning room with a heavy crystal tumbler in his hand, watching the rain begin to mist against the windows. "You're quite the inquisitor, aren't you?" Quayle said, without looking up. "I merely observe," Poirot replied. "And think." Quayle took a sip. "You do well to observe the tension in this house. It's not new. Alaric collects people like antiques, discards them just as quickly. He's made enemies. Don't let the country charm fool you." "Enemies?" Poirot asked quietly. Oh yes, business rivals, former employees, women, and family too. Don't think Felix hasn't considered what happens when the old man finally kicks the bucket. Poirot gave no outward reaction, but tucked that comment away in his memory. Shortly before luncheon, a loud knock echoed from the front hall, followed by the hurried footsteps of the butler. Poirot heard the faint crack of a voice, female, urgent. Moments later, Isabel Langford stormed into the drawing room, eyes wide, face pale. "Jonathan," she gasped, I can't get him to respond. Alaric's locked in his study." Everyone rose at once. "He was in there all morning," she cried. "He told me to leave after we spoke, but just now I heard a crash, and he wouldn't answer." Poirot was already moving. "Show me." They hurried through the long corridor to a heavy oaken door at the end. Isabel pointed. "He locks it from inside, always." Poirot rapped sharply. "Sir Alaric, are you unwell? It is Poirot. Open, if you please." Silence. Poirot turned to Felix, who had just arrived, breathless. "Get the gardener. We must force it." It took the better part of 5 minutes and a crowbar, but at last the door gave way. The study beyond was in disarray, papers scattered, a decanter toppled, the curtains half drawn, and behind the desk, Sir Alaric Langford lay slumped in his chair, motionless, eyes glassy. His skin was a strange grey hue, and his mouth slightly open as if caught mid-thought. Poirot stepped closer. No pulse. He turned to the room. "No one is to leave this house." "Is he?" Felix began, but Poirot held up a hand. "I believe," he said quietly, "that Sir Alaric has been murdered." And then, very softly, he added, "And I think I already smell almonds." Chapter 3. The Locked Room. The study at Greystone Grange, once a domain of authority and rich masculine solitude, now exhaled a chill far colder than the autumn breeze rattling the ivy outside its windows. Hercule Poirot stood near the centre of the room, arms folded neatly across his chest, his eyes scanning every surface. Beside him, Dr. Jonathan Larch bent over Sir Alaric Langford's body, performing a cursory examination. "Poison," Larch murmured, straightening. "I'd wager my reputation on it. The grey skin, the loosened jaw, the faint scent. Yes, it's cyanide. Bitter almonds, unmistakable." Poirot nodded once, slowly. "You confirm what my little grey cells have already begun to whisper." Behind them, the rest of the household gathered like uneasy ghosts in the doorway. Felix, visibly pale, stared at his father's corpse as though he scarcely believed in its finality. Isabel clutched a handkerchief, dabbing her lips more than her eyes. Octavia stood stiffly, expression unreadable. Harold Quayle had already poured himself a stiff whisky from the sideboard and sipped it without apology. "This room," Poirot said, turning toward the crowd, "was locked from the inside?" "Yes," Felix replied. "No key in the outer lock. Alaric always turned the bolt himself. He was paranoid about privacy." "There is no other entrance? No connecting door?" Octavia answered crisply. "None. Only the windows, and those are barred on the outside. A relic from the old days." Poirot moved to inspect the tall sash windows. True enough, sturdy black iron bars, aged and immovable, were fitted firmly to the stone exterior. Not even a small dog could slip through. "And this morning," Poirot continued, "did anyone enter this room after Sir Alaric dismissed Madame Langford?" Isabel shook her head quickly. "Number. He said he had work and would not be disturbed." "And yet," Poirot said quietly, "he was disturbed most fatally." Larch cleared his throat. "Poirot, I must inform the coroner. He'll wish to examine the body properly." "Of course, mon ami," Poirot replied. "But first, a moment." He moved slowly toward the desk, where Alaric had slumped. The man's right hand dangled lifelessly over the arm of the chair. A single sheet of notepaper lay near his elbow, half written. Poirot leaned in to read it. "To those concerned, let it be known that should anything befall me, it was not accident, nor folly." The sentence broke off mid-word. The pen had rolled to the floor. Poirot held the page between two fingertips. A message begun but never finished. That is most telling. Octavia frowned. He was paranoid, yes, but suicide? That seems unlikely. No, madame, Poirot said sharply. It is not suicide. The door was bolted from the inside, yes, but this was no act of despair. It was murder, with cleverness. He looked again to the desk. Among the items, an inkwell, a brass letter opener, a bowl of sugared almonds. One stood out. A small porcelain cup, delicate and oddly out of place amidst the heavy leather tomes and ledgers. Poirot bent down and sniffed its contents. He wrinkled his nose. Coffee, or what remains of it. Dr. Larch? Larch leaned over and took a cautious sniff. Yes, that would be the means, I suspect. Bitter, masked by strong brew. Classic method. Poirot placed the cup down and turned back to the room. Now we must ask who brought this to Sir Alaric, and when. The butler, Merton, was summoned, and appeared promptly, his expression grim but professional. Sir? Monsieur Merton, Poirot said gently. This coffee? Did you prepare it? No, sir. I brought a pot to the parlour with breakfast, but if Sir Alaric had a cup later, it was not from me. Then who? I cannot say. Cook prepares a tray for him mid-morning, but it is always one of the maids who delivers it. Poirot looked up. Elsie Brent. The butler hesitated. No, sir. Elsie does the parlour and bedrooms. The study is part of Mary Stone's rotation. She would have brought the tray. Mary was fetched, a woman of some 50 years with a pinched expression and dry hands. She curtsied stiffly. I took the tray in around 10:30, sir. Just the usual. Black coffee and 2 almonds. Did you prepare it yourself? No, sir. Cook poured the coffee. I just carried it. Did you see Sir Alaric drink it? I placed it on the desk and he nodded, told me to leave quickly. He was in one of his moods. And was the door locked behind you? Yes, sir. He always turned the bolt after I left, heard it click as I was walking away. Poirot steepled his fingers. Then we must consider the possibilities. Either the poison was already in the coffee when Cook poured it, unlikely, or it was added before Sir Alaric drank. But by whom, and how? He paused. Madame Langford, you said you were summoned to the study this morning. Yes, she replied faintly. Around 11. He wanted to speak about the guest list for the winter gala. You stayed long? Only 10 minutes. He was tense. He said I was not to disturb him further. Did you notice the coffee? She hesitated. Yes. The cup was there, half finished. Poirot's brow furrowed. And after you left, did you see anyone? She shook her head. No. Felix stepped forward suddenly. What are you suggesting, Monsieur Poirot? That someone slipped poison into my father's cup while the door was locked? I am suggesting, Poirot said softly, that appearances can deceive. He turned back to the desk. There, amid the scattered papers, a small object caught his eye. A button, plain, black, and slightly scuffed. He picked it up delicately. This does not belong to Sir Alaric's attire. Quayle frowned. Could have fallen from the chair. It's an old room. No, Poirot said firmly. It is recent, and from a different fabric entirely. He slipped the button into his pocket. As the others murmured, Poirot took one last turn about the room. His gaze settled briefly on the fireplace, then the bookcase. Something ticked faintly in his mind, an observation not quite formed. He turned to face them all. Until the coroner arrives, this room must remain sealed. No one is to touch anything. You understand? There were nods, reluctant and varied. As they filed out, Poirot lingered behind. Alone now, he moved to the hearth and crouched. Gently, he ran his fingers over the edge of the ornate andirons. There, a faint smudge. Powdery, pale. He dipped a fingertip. Ash, but not from logs. Poirot straightened slowly. Someone, he said softly, has destroyed something here. He turned and quietly shut the study door behind him. Whatever had been erased in fire, he would recover in thought, for nothing escapes the eyes of Hercule Poirot, not buttons, not bitterness, and certainly not murder. Chapter 4. Suspicions and Shadows. By early evening, the skies over Greystone Grange had darkened into a thick pewter grey. A fine drizzle veiled the estate, the garden paths slick and shimmering like wet slate. Indoors, however, the household was far from still. The unexpected death of Sir Alaric Langford had unsettled not just the inhabitants, but the very rhythm of the house itself. In the drawing-room, a fire had been lit, more for comfort than necessity. Poirot sat in a high-backed chair near the hearth, his eyes calm, watchful, and faintly amused. He was not a man to be hurried. Outside, death had come like a thief in the study. Inside, the detective waited for truth to arrive, patiently, delicately, like a cat at a mouse hole. "Of course he had enemies," said Octavia coldly, pacing before the windows. "Alaric thrived on creating them. That was his sport." Felix looked up sharply from his position on the sofa. "Even if that's true, you forget the practical matter. This was a locked-room murder. If the door was bolted and the windows barred, then whoever killed him must have already been inside." Octavia sniffed. "That implies suicide again, which I refuse to believe." "Or," Poirot interjected softly, "it implies cunning. A most meticulous mind." Octavia stopped pacing. "You're suggesting someone not only planned the murder, but manipulated the scene?" Poirot's eyebrows lifted ever so slightly. "I suggest nothing yet, madame. I collect. I observe. And slowly, slowly the facts arrange themselves." He turned to Felix. "Tell me, monsieur, how did you spend your morning?" Felix looked uncomfortable. "After breakfast, I went to the conservatory. I needed time to think." "Alone?" "Yes, I stayed there until I heard the shouting, Isabel's voice calling for help." "Did you speak to your father this morning?" "No." He hesitated. "I avoided him. We hadn't spoken cordially in weeks." "Over what matter?" Felix looked at Octavia, then away. "It doesn't matter now." "But it does," Poirot said gently. "To you, perhaps it is a wound, but to the murderer, if we are to find them, it may be motive." Felix exhaled. "Very well." We argued over the company's future. He planned to disinherit me if I didn't sign away my shares to a foreign investment group he'd aligned with. I refused. "And Madame Langford, your stepmother? What was her position in this argument?" Isabel, seated quietly near the fire, looked up with unreadable eyes. "I stayed out of it." "Really?" Octavia said archly. "That would be the first time." Poirot turned to her. "And you, mademoiselle? You seem quite convinced your stepmother plays a greater role than she claims." Octavia's voice was flat. "She arrived with nothing. Now she lives like a queen." Isabel's face remained calm. "You always hated me, Octavia. Nothing I did would have changed that." "It's not hatred," Octavia snapped. "It's instinct. Some women can smell a lie as easily as perfume." Poirot lifted a hand. "Mesdames, please. Emotion is the spice of life, but in detection, it is often a fog. Let us deal in facts." He stood and moved to the writing desk in the corner. "There is something I find troubling. Sir Alaric was writing a letter when he died. A warning, perhaps, but it was never finished." "Because he was killed," said Felix. "Just so, but the letter's content was vague, no name, no direct accusation." Poirot turned suddenly. "Has anyone here ever known Sir Alaric to be sentimental?" There was a murmur of polite laughter. "Then it surprises me," Poirot continued, "that a man so cold, so strategic, would begin such a dramatic note without a clear purpose, unless he knew he would never finish it." Quayle poured himself another drink. "Sounds to me like the sort of theatrical nonsense he was always fond of. If he thought he was in danger, he'd dramatize it." "Or," Poirot said, "he was making a record. A safeguard, but someone acted first." He turned. "Mr. Quayle, you were in business with Sir Alaric, n'est-ce pas?" "Not directly. I handled the export arrangements for Langford Industries. He gave the orders, I moved the goods." "Did you profit?" Quayle hesitated. "I did well enough." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "But not recently?" Quayle met his gaze. Number the last year's been difficult. And Sir Alaric threatened to sever ties? He threatened everyone. Me, Felix, the suppliers. He liked to dangle people like puppets. Pull a string here, cut a cord there, always watching. Poirot nodded. And when the puppets grow tired, they may cut strings of their own, eh? Silence. Just then, the door opened and Inspector Chedwick entered, short, round-faced, mustachioed, and with the air of a man perpetually inconvenienced. Evening all. I've just come from the coroner. Poison confirmed. Cyanide, as your doctor suspected. He eyed Poirot. Locked room, was it? Oui, Poirot said calmly. Most inconvenient for the truth, but not, I think, insurmountable. Chedwick sighed. Well, I'll need statements from everyone. And I'll need that room sealed tighter than a drum. Poirot nodded. There are clues within. One must let the facts breathe before they speak. Let's hope they speak clearly, the inspector muttered. As he began his interviews, Poirot stepped out into the hallway. He paused at the foot of the stairs, gaze drawn to a narrow hallway leading toward the servants' wing. He had not yet spoken to Mary Stone again, nor to Elsie Brent. The household below stairs often saw more than they were meant to. He descended, slippers silent on the stone. In the scullery he found Elsie polishing silver with quiet diligence. Mademoiselle Brent, he said softly. A moment. She straightened, startled. Yes, sir? You mentioned yesterday that you heard Sir Alaric arguing. Are you quite certain it was with Madame Langford? She nodded. Yes, sir. I recognized her voice. Not angry, just quiet. Poirot considered this. And what of this morning? Did you see anyone go to the study after the maid brought the tray? Elsie bit her lip. I didn't see anyone, sir. But, well, there was something odd. Go on. I was passing the back corridor just after 11. The door to the study was closed, but I heard something. A scraping sound, like someone dragging a chair. Poirot's eyes lit. Très intéressant. Did you hear voices? No, sir, just the sound, then silence. Poirot nodded. You have a good ear, mademoiselle. Never doubt its worth. As he returned to the main hall, he paused on the stair. Someone had entered that room after Alaric was poisoned, perhaps even before, and manipulated the scene. Perhaps that same someone had added the button Poirot had found, or perhaps left it behind by accident. Chapter 5. Footprints in Smoke. The following morning broke grey and sullen, as though the skies themselves grieved Sir Alaric's death. At Greystone Grange, a subtle unease hung like a shroud over the house. No one had slept well. Footsteps echoed more cautiously in the corridors. Breakfast was eaten in tight silence. Hercule Poirot, as always immaculately dressed, descended the stairs shortly after 8. The detective's gait was measured, precise. He was not a man to be hurried by grief or distracted by gloom. In the dining room, Felix was nursing a tepid cup of tea, his collar open, his mood unreadable. Good morning, Monsieur Langford, Poirot said cheerfully. Felix gave a wan nod. Barely. I hardly slept. Poirot seated himself and accepted toast from the butler with a polite nod. That is often the case, mon ami, when the dead do not rest easily. Felix flinched slightly. Do you believe that's the case here? I believe, monsieur, that truth rarely lies on the surface. We must dig a little. He spread butter on his toast with elegant precision, then paused. Tell me, your father's study. Who had access to the key? Felix hesitated. He kept the key on a chain in his pocket, only he had it. Once the door was locked from the inside, there was no way in or out. Unless, Poirot said quietly, someone had another key, or unless the bolt itself was tampered with. Felix looked up. You think it was staged? Poirot did not answer directly. Instead, he said, May I see your father's study once more? They walked together to the gloomy corridor, the air colder here. The door to the study still bore the coroner's seal. Chedwick had insisted it remain untouched for 48 hours, but Poirot had been granted one last look before final sealing. He entered slowly. The room had not changed. The body had been removed, but the air still smelled faintly of smoke and bitter almonds. The papers on the desk were untouched, as was the shattered porcelain coffee cup, still lying on the carpet beside the chair. Poirot moved to the fireplace. The logs were burnt down to ash now, the andirons stained with soot. He bent low, inspecting the hearth tiles. A thin film of grey powder had gathered in the cracks. But there, on the outer edge, was something different. He leaned closer. A partial footprint. Just the ball of a foot, with a faint outline of heel. Too faint for the naked eye, perhaps, but Poirot saw it. It had been left by someone stepping too close to the hearth, perhaps to burn something hastily. He smiled to himself. Standing, he crossed to the bookshelf that lined the western wall. A volume had been removed recently. He could tell by the fine layer of dust disrupted around the space. He reached out and pulled the next book along the row, flipping its pages carefully. Inside, on page 172 of the Merchant's Ledger, International Trade. 1909 to 1914, he found a sheet of notepaper tucked between the leaves. He unfolded it. Numbers, figures, some underlined. At the bottom, a set of initials, HQ, Harold Quayle. Poirot slipped the paper into his pocket, his expression thoughtful. Back in the hallway, Inspector Chedwick was waiting. "You're not done already, are you?" he asked, frowning. Poirot gave a modest shrug. "One does not need time, Inspector. One needs clarity." Chedwick grunted. "You've got more faith in dust and buttons than I do." "Ah," Poirot smiled. "But dust and buttons do not lie." He returned to the parlour where Isabel Langford sat reading. She looked up with polite apprehension. "Madame Langford," Poirot began gently, "you knew about Sir Alaric's finances?" "Somewhat. He shared enough to keep me aware, but not involved." "You were not concerned with his international dealings?" "Not particularly." "And yet," Poirot said, "he was planning to name you sole executor of his estate." She stared. "That's absurd." "No." Poirot held out a document. "I found this in the study, tucked in a ledger, signed but not yet filed. He changed his will. You stood to inherit everything." Isabel's face paled. "I didn't know. He never told me." Octavia, entering the room just in time to hear, let out a bitter laugh. "Of course not. That's the Langford way. Pretend, hide, manipulate." Poirot raised a hand. "Please, let us not leap to judgments." He turned to Isabel. "You had no knowledge of this?" "No," she said quietly. "But he must have done it recently. He was acting unusually kind the last few weeks. I thought he was softening. Now I see he was preparing for something." Poirot's voice was soft. "And someone else may have discovered it. Someone who stood to lose everything." From the doorway, Harold Quayle appeared, arms folded. "I'm tired of this little parlour theatre," he growled. "You're pointing fingers in the dark." "Not in the dark, monsieur," Poirot replied, "but in the smoke." Harold sneered. "Is that supposed to be clever?" "I found a paper," Poirot said mildly. "One with your handwriting, financial figures, discrepancies. It suggests creative accounting." Harold turned stiff. "I don't know what you're talking about." "No?" Poirot moved closer. "Then why were those papers hidden in a volume in the study? And why was part of them destroyed in the fireplace?" Octavia's eyes widened. "He tried to burn evidence." "Oui," Poirot said, but he stepped too close to the hearth, left a print. Isabel said faintly, "But why would Mr. Quayle kill Alaric over figures?" Poirot's voice lowered. "Because Sir Alaric discovered the discrepancies, and he intended to confront Mr. Quayle, or already had. But I do not think Mr. Quayle is our murderer." Harold looked stunned. "What?" Poirot turned away from him. "Number..." He burned papers to protect himself, but not to kill. There is a difference between fear and murder. A long silence followed. Tension now clung to the air, thick and unpleasant. Finally, Poirot spoke again. "There is one more person I must speak to before the truth comes clearly into view." He turned to the hallway. "Mademoiselle Brent, if you please." Chapter 6. The Maid's Secret. Elsie Brent stood just inside the doorway of the parlour, twisting her hands nervously in the crisp folds of her apron. Her dark eyes flitted from Poirot to the assembled Langfords, then back to the floor, as though the polished mahogany might offer her a safe escape. Poirot offered her a reassuring nod. "Do not be frightened, mademoiselle. I ask only that you speak with honesty. The smallest truth may illuminate the darkest corners, n'est-ce pas?" Elsie looked up hesitantly. "Yes, sir." "Now," he said, gesturing gently for her to sit. "You have worked at Greystone Grange for 2 years, no? You know its rhythms, its silences. So tell me, on the morning of Sir Alaric's death, did you notice anything unusual?" Elsie swallowed hard. "Yes, sir, I didn't think it meant anything at first." "Tell us from the beginning," Poirot encouraged. "Well, it was about 10:30. Mary, Miss Stone, was preparing Sir Alaric's coffee. I was helping her with the tray, just like every morning, but then I noticed—" She paused, her fingers tightening. "Yes," Poirot said softly. The sugar bowl had already been tampered with. There was a sharp rustle in the room, Octavia's gasp, Isabel's intake of breath. "Tampered how?" asked Inspector Chedwick, who had just entered behind Elsie and now stood by the door. Elsie glanced at him nervously, then at Poirot, as if seeking permission. Poirot nodded. "Go on." "The lid was off, just slightly. It wasn't like that earlier. We always cover everything before we take the tray in, and the spoon. It had a faint smell." Chedwick frowned. "Smell?" Elsie nodded. "Like almonds, bitter almonds. I didn't think much of it at the time. I just wiped it and replaced it. But now—" Poirot's eyes glimmered. "You did well, mademoiselle. You observed. That is important." He stood and paced slowly, tapping one elegant finger against his chin. "So someone, before the tray was delivered, had added something to the sugar, something they hoped would go unnoticed, and yet who had the opportunity?" "Anyone who passed through the kitchen that morning," said Chedwick grimly. "We'll need to speak to everyone downstairs again." "Indeed," Poirot murmured, "but let us not look only at the hand that tampered. Let us also consider the mind that planned." He turned to Elsie once more. "Tell me, did Sir Alaric have visitors this week? Anyone not from the household?" Elsie blinked. "Yes, sir, just one. A man came on Tuesday afternoon. I wasn't told his name. He stayed only a short while." Felix stirred. "Father said he had an old acquaintance calling on business." "Can you describe him?" Poirot asked. Elsie thought for a moment. "Tall, wore a dark coat and hat. He never removed his gloves. I offered tea. He refused." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "How curious. You remember anything else?" She hesitated. "Only that Sir Alaric was very unsettled afterward. He snapped at me. That wasn't like him." Poirot nodded slowly. "Merci, mademoiselle. You have given me much to think on." Elsie gave a faint curtsy and left the room. As the door clicked softly shut behind her, the atmosphere shifted, more tense, more alert. Octavia broke the silence. "If someone tampered with the sugar, then Mary might have seen it too." "She might," Poirot agreed, "but I do not believe Mary would have recognized the scent. Bitter almonds are a subtle signature." Felix frowned. "But if someone had access to the kitchen, why not just add the poison then and there?" "Because, mon cher," Poirot said gently, "doing it in plain sight is dangerous, but creating a distraction, leaving the lid slightly ajar, might encourage a careless servant to blame it on their own oversight." Isabel folded her arms. "So we are meant to believe someone from this house crept into the kitchen in broad daylight and poisoned the sugar bowl." "Not crept," said Poirot. "Acted, calmly, with confidence. Confidence, madame, is often mistaken for innocence." Chedwick cleared his throat. "We've been looking at motives. Inheritance, revenge, business. But opportunity might be the simpler path. Someone who knew the household routines intimately. Poirot's eyes gleamed. Indeed. And yet, there is something more. He reached into his coat and withdrew the crumpled sheet of numbers found hidden in the ledger. This was left deliberately. Our killer is clever, oh yes, but no one is perfect. This sheet implicates Mr. Quayle, but it is almost too convenient. Planted, perhaps? Quayle, who had entered quietly a moment earlier, bristled. "You're saying someone framed me?" "I say, monsieur, that someone wanted suspicion to fall upon you, but not permanently. No, it was a temporary misdirection." Felix looked at Poirot in alarm. "Then the real murderer is still hidden?" Poirot turned his gaze to the fire. "Not hidden, monsieur, only quiet, waiting." Suddenly, Octavia spoke. Her voice was colder than the morning fog. "You're all missing the obvious. If someone tampered with the sugar bowl, they must have known exactly when the coffee would be prepared. That means someone who was already awake, already watching." Her eyes met Isabel's across the room. "I saw you, you know, that morning, standing at the kitchen arch, listening." Isabel's face froze. "That's a lie. You had reason to want him gone. You knew the new will had been signed. You'd have lost everything if he changed his mind again." Poirot raised a hand. "Enough. This is not a trial." He stepped forward. "But the mademoiselle is correct on one point. The murderer was watching, calculating, and it is that precision which will undo them." He paused at the door, casting a glance back. "One final detail remains, the key to everything. And when I have it, mes amis, the curtain will rise." Chapter 7. A Whisper in the Rain. The rain began that afternoon, soft at first, like a shy knock at the windows, then heavier, as if the sky had grown impatient with secrets. The moors beyond Greystone Grange blurred into a gauzy smear of grey and green. Within the house, tension lingered like the scent of wood smoke and old roses. Poirot sat alone in the drawing room, staring into the fire. Though his hands were still, his little grey cells danced with movement. The clues had spoken, but their voices were quiet. It required a very precise ear to hear what they whispered. The door creaked open. Felix Langford stepped in. "Everyone's on edge," he said. "My aunt refuses to come down from her room. Quayle's pacing the halls like a caged dog. Even Isabel's finally stopped pretending nothing's wrong." Poirot nodded thoughtfully. "Good. When people are uneasy, they slip?" Felix raised an eyebrow. "And what are you hoping they'll slip on?" "The mask, monsieur." Poirot smiled faintly. "The murderer always wears a mask, but emotion, it causes cracks." Felix looked away, arms folded. "I keep wondering if I missed something. Father wasn't perfect, but I can't make sense of why anyone would go so far." Poirot rose, smoothing his jacket. "Perhaps you can help me clarify something, monsieur. Your father, was he sentimental?" "Rarely. He was more strategic." "Then why?" Poirot asked gently. "Would a man such as that change his will so dramatically, handing everything to his new wife?" Felix's jaw clenched. "He wasn't senile, if that's what you're suggesting." "No," Poirot replied, "but he may have felt guilt or fear." There was a long pause. "I don't follow." Poirot turned to the window. "He changed his will 3 days before his death. That much is clear. But such decisions are not made in isolation. Something must have prompted it." Felix hesitated, then said, "There was an argument the night before." Poirot looked back sharply. "An argument?" "I didn't mention it before. I thought it was private." "My stepmother and father were in the study. I heard shouting." "What kind of shouting?" "She was accusing him of hiding something. He laughed it off, then..." There was silence. After a few minutes, she came out and looked pale. She said nothing, just went upstairs. Poirot's eyes narrowed. "And Sir Alaric?" He emerged later, went straight to the library. He poured himself a large drink. That was unusual for him. Poirot tapped his chin. And you didn't think to mention this earlier? I thought it was just a lover's spat. There are no justs in murder, Monsieur Langford. Outside, the wind had risen. A storm was approaching. Poirot moved with purpose through the house until he reached the corridor leading to the guest wing. There, at the far end, was Mary Stone's room. He knocked. She opened the door slowly. Her eyes were tired, her uniform immaculate. "Monsieur Poirot," she said with quiet surprise. "Is everything all right?" "May I come in for a moment, mademoiselle?" She nodded. "Of course." The room was modest, a tidy bed, a worn copy of Little Dorrit on the table, a jug and basin beside the window. Poirot looked around approvingly. "You are very organized, Mademoiselle Stone." She gave a small smile. "One must be in this household." Poirot turned. "Tell me, when you prepared the coffee tray that morning, you were interrupted?" Mary's hands tightened slightly. "Only for a moment. I stepped out to fetch the Morning Post from the side table. I was barely gone half a minute." "Long enough for someone to slip something into the sugar?" She blinked, then nodded slowly. "Yes, I suppose it would have been." Poirot leaned forward. "Do you remember who came through the corridor just then?" Mary paused. "Miss Octavia passed by. She was muttering to herself. I remember because she knocked over the umbrella stand." "Did she enter the kitchen?" Mary hesitated. "I don't think so." "But she could have?" Mary's brow furrowed. "Yes." Poirot's voice dropped. "You knew Sir Alaric well, better than most. Did he trust his wife?" Mary looked down. "Number he pretended to, but he feared her?" "I think he regretted marrying her. She had a way of making him feel small." Poirot nodded. "Merci, mademoiselle." He left her room with a heavy heart. The walls of Greystone Grange were whispering now, secrets long buried beginning to stir. As Poirot descended the stairs, he was met by Isabel. "You've been speaking to the servants," she said coolly. "I speak to everyone, madame." She folded her arms. "Do you think me a fool?" "Not at all. I think you're quite intelligent enough to know when a noose tightens." Her eyes narrowed. "You're accusing me?" "I accuse no one. I simply observe. You knew your husband was changing the will. You feared losing your status, your place." "You're wrong," she snapped. "I didn't know. I found out only yesterday. From you." "Did you?" Poirot's voice was almost kind. "Or did you see the signed draft in the study days before his death?" Her breath caught. "I found the desk drawer open the night before he died. The draft was gone the next morning." "You knew." She took a step back, eyes wild. "He was going to ruin me." There was silence. Poirot said softly, "People kill for less." She stared at him, then turned and fled up the stairs. That evening, a letter arrived, brought in by the soaked postman who cursed the rain. Poirot accepted it with curiosity. The envelope was addressed in firm, old-fashioned script. No return name. He opened it. Inside, a single sheet of paper. "You are looking in the wrong place. The poison was never in the sugar. A friend." Poirot stared at the note. Then he smiled. "Ah," he said aloud, "the killer grows nervous. They tried to direct me away, which means I am nearly there." Outside, the wind howled. Inside, Poirot stood at the centre of Greystone Grange, all threads in hand. Tomorrow he would gather them all, for the truth, at last, would be revealed. Chapter 8. The little grey cells speak. The storm had passed, leaving a crisp chill in the morning air and the soft murmur of dripping leaves outside the grand windows of Greystone Grange. Inside, the household was gathered in the drawing-room, faces taut with apprehension and curiosity. Hercule Poirot stood before them, small and precise as ever, his moustaches perfectly waxed, hands folded calmly behind his back. "Mes amis," he began, his voice steady. "We have reached the moment where the web is untangled, the puzzle complete. It is time for the truth." The room was silent, but for the steady ticking of the grandfather clock, which seemed to mark the final beats before revelation. Poirot turned first to Octavia Langford, who sat, stiffly, hands clenched in her lap. "Madame," he said kindly, "you have been the subject of much scrutiny. You were present near the kitchen when the poison was likely introduced." Octavia's eyes flashed. "Yes, and what of it?" Poirot inclined his head. "I do not believe you are the murderer, but your impatience and anger over the will were clear." Octavia's lips pressed thin. "Now," Poirot continued, "let us consider the sugar bowl. It was tampered with, yes, but the note we received yesterday was correct. The poison was not in the sugar." Gasps echoed faintly. "The poison was placed in Sir Alaric's morning coffee after the sugar was stirred in." Poirot gestured to Mary Stone. "Mademoiselle, you recall the moment you left the kitchen briefly?" "Yes," Mary said, her voice trembling slightly. "It was then the poison was administered." "Impossible," Octavia snapped. "Mary would have noticed." Poirot smiled gently. "Ah, but the poison was disguised. Bitter almonds smell faintly of cyanide, but this was a colourless, tasteless substance, slipped into the coffee quietly." He turned to Isabel Langford. "Madame, you knew of the will's contents and stood to lose everything if it passed. You were overheard arguing with Sir Alaric. Your motive was clear." Isabel's eyes darted. "Yet you are not the murderer." She exhaled sharply. "Then who is?" Poirot's gaze settled on Felix Langford. Felix stiffened. "Mon Dieu, no, I loved my father." Poirot nodded. "Love is a complex emotion, monsieur, but consider this. You were the last to see your father alive. You knew of the will's changes, and you had the access." Felix shook his head vehemently. "I did not kill him." "No," Poirot agreed, "but someone else did." He moved toward the fireplace and drew from his coat pocket a small glass vial. This vial contained the poison, the same that caused Sir Alaric's death. And this, he held up a silver key. This key unlocked the pantry where the vial was hidden. He turned to Inspector Chedwick. "May I ask you, who had access to this key?" Chedwick consulted his notes. "Only the household members, and specifically Octavia and Isabel." Poirot smiled faintly. "But the key was found in a very unusual place, in the pocket of the butler, Mr. Quayle." Quayle's face paled. "Oui," said Poirot, "and here lies the truth." He took a breath. "The poison was placed in Sir Alaric's coffee by none other than Mr. Quayle." Shock rippled through the room. Quayle's jaw tightened. "You're mad. On the contrary, your motives are twofold. First, to avenge a long-held grievance. Years ago, Sir Alaric denied you a promotion. Second, to gain financially by implicating others." Quayle's mask cracked. "I did not kill him." "Yet your fingerprints were found on the vial, and your gloves were discovered in the pantry, the very gloves described by the maid." Quayle's shoulders slumped. Poirot's eyes gleamed. "But why the elaborate deception? Because you hoped suspicion would fall upon the family members, distracting the investigation." He turned to Felix. "Monsieur, you may not have killed your father, but you uncovered the truth." Felix nodded slowly. "And you, Isabel and Octavia, you were caught in a web of fear and suspicion, but innocent." Octavia and Isabel exchanged glances, relief flooding their faces. Poirot straightened. "Mes amis, murder is the crime of passion and calculation, but it is always revealed by the little grey cells, the quiet intelligence that sees beyond appearances." He smiled gently. "Let us now leave this place with justice restored, and with the memory of Sir Alaric honoured." As Quayle was led away by Inspector Chedwick, the household seemed to exhale a collective breath. Felix approached Poirot. "Thank you, monsieur, for seeing what none of us could." Poirot's eyes twinkled. "Mais oui, monsieur, it is always the little things, the overlooked detail, that tell the greatest truths." And with that, Hercule Poirot adjusted his cuffs, took up his cane, and prepared to leave Greystone Grange behind, another mystery elegantly solved by the power of reason psychology, and those famous little grey cells. Epilogue. Reflections at Greystone Grange. The soft light of a late spring afternoon filtered gently through the tall windows of Greystone Grange, casting long, dappled shadows upon the polished wooden floorboards. Outside, the gardens were beginning to burst into their early bloom. Delicate primroses nestled under ancient oaks, lilac bushes swayed softly in the breeze, and the sweet scent of freshly cut grass mingled with the faint perfume of blooming roses. It was a peaceful scene, utterly at odds with the turbulence that had recently swept through the grand estate. Inside the drawing room, only a handful of figures remained. The house was quieter now, bereft of the earlier tension and whispers that had seemed to hang like a shroud over every corridor. The guests and servants alike had either departed or resumed their duties with a renewed sense of solemnity. And yet there was an unmistakable weight of contemplation in the air. Hercule Poirot sat in his favourite armchair near the hearth, the fire's glow warming his neatly trimmed moustaches and calm, deliberate features. His hands were folded, and his keen eyes gazed thoughtfully into the flickering flames. Across the room, Felix Langford stood beside a window, his expression clouded but less troubled than before. Isabel Langford sat quietly on a nearby settee, the lines of recent distress softened by the passing days. Octavia, the formidable widow, had retreated to her own quarters but left a polite note expressing thanks to Monsieur Poirot. Poirot's voice broke the silence, measured and precise, as was his manner. "Monsieur Langford, madame, we have witnessed how a house, no matter how grand, can hold many secrets within its walls. Secrets that fester quietly, waiting for the slightest crack to let the poison seep through." Felix nodded, fingers lightly tapping on the window ledge. "It feels like a lifetime ago now, the night father died. Yet the memories remain vivid, the fear, the suspicion, the uncertainty." "Indeed," Poirot agreed softly. "And yet it is in these moments of crisis that the true nature of people is revealed. You, monsieur, showed courage in facing the truth when it might have been easier to hide behind anger or grief." Felix gave a faint smile. "It was difficult. There were times I doubted if the truth would come to light at all." Poirot's eyes twinkled. "Ah, but that is the gift of the little grey cells. They never rest, they never tire. They observe, analyze, and ultimately, they uncover." He paused and leaned forward slightly. "And now I believe the estate itself must begin to heal. Justice has been served, but the wounds, emotional and otherwise, will take time to close." Isabel shifted, glancing toward Felix. "It is strange, isn't it? How someone you once loved and trusted can become so alien, so unknowable in a moment." "Yes," Felix murmured. "Father was a difficult man, proud, sometimes cold, but I never imagined anyone in this house capable of murder." "Yet," Poirot said gently, "murder is rarely born of hatred alone. It is more often a complicated dance of fear, desperation, and misplaced loyalty." There was a brief silence before Isabel spoke again, her voice quieter, almost reflective. "I suppose we all wore masks. We tried to protect ourselves, even from one another." "And now the masks have fallen," Poirot replied. "Truth is a sharp blade, monsieur et madame. It cuts through illusion, revealing what is beneath." Felix turned away from the window to face Poirot directly. "Monsieur Poirot, if I may ask, what will you do now?" Poirot smiled faintly, brushing an imaginary speck from his jacket. "My work continues, monsieur. Wherever there is mystery, injustice, or despair, there too will I go." The room brightened slightly as the sun broke through a drifting cloud, sending a warm glow across the polished floor. Poirot rose and moved to the window, looking out over the estate grounds. "Greystone Grange is a place of history," he said softly, "but also of stories. Some are dark, like the one we have just seen. Others will be bright, filled with hope." Felix joined him at the window, his gaze following Poirot's. "Do you think this house will ever be the same?" he asked quietly. No, Poirot answered without hesitation. But that is the nature of change. One cannot step into the same river twice. The house will remember what has passed, but it will also witness new beginnings. Isabel rose and moved closer, her eyes thoughtful. What about the others? The servants, the family. They must find a way forward. Indeed, Poirot said, each must learn to forgive, to trust anew, and sometimes the smallest kindness is the greatest medicine. The clock chimed gently, marking the passage of another hour. Poirot turned to face his companions once more, a serene smile playing about his lips. And so, mes amis, we conclude this chapter in the story of Greystone Grange. But remember, where there is humanity, there are always mysteries to be solved and truths to be uncovered. As the afternoon light softened, the quiet hum of life resumed in the house. The estate was no longer merely a backdrop for tragedy, but a place where healing might begin. Later, as Poirot prepared to leave, Felix came to the hall to see him off. Thank you, Monsieur Poirot. You've given us all a chance to move forward. Poirot tipped his hat with a flourish. It was my honor, monsieur. May your little grey cells always guide you well. With that, the great detective stepped into his waiting car, the gentle hum of the engine blending with the sounds of the awakening countryside. As the vehicle rolled away, Greystone Grange stood quietly in the soft glow of evening, a house marked by sorrow, yes, but also by the unyielding promise of tomorrow,